Yep, so we're learning Perek Ches, which is talking about the drachim of learning Torah and midos and the like. So I think we were in the middle of Sif Yud Aleph, so I'm going to start from the beginning of Yud Aleph. He first talks about the fact that Torah is compared to a lot of things, but one of the things Torah is compared to in Mishlei is lechem. Torah is compared to bread. And he says that when you make bread, there's a lot of impurities in the grain that you have to filter out. There is the husk of the grain, the bran of the grain, you have to get rid of it in order to have fine flour. So he says, Kamo shebalechem hagufani. In physical bread, yesh teven. In the grain, there is straw, right? That's the straw, you got to get rid of that. Motz is the husk around the kernel, that's totally inedible. Now then, subin and morsan are like bran. It's interesting that today people like whole grain and bran and the like, but in the time of Chazal, the notion was that that was inferior bread. The best bread was pure white flour. So teven and mites are inedible even today. They are the straw and they are the chaff or the husk. And subin is bran, and morsan is also part of the bran that you would normally remove. So in other words, for lechem, you have to remove a lot of impurities. V'tzarech l'kama malachos ad sheyasa lechem. You got to do many malachos until you get the bread. In fact, many of the malachos of Shabbos, Zaira and Bayrer, are based on purifying the flour in order to be able to make bread out of it. So Kain b'Torah, so Torah is called bread. Shitz kasav by l'chu lachmu b'lachmi. The pasuk says that the Torah is calling to us in Mishlei. The way Mishlei is written, or at least the way certain chapters of Mishlei are written, the Torah is talking. The Torah actually talks. The Torah is talking to us like a person. Lachmu b'lachmi, eat my bread. The Torah is saying, eat my bread. So, what is the comparison? V'zehu kol amel haTorah lahaitzi halacha berura. So again, just reading this literally, the tachlis of all of the toil that you have in the Torah is to be mitzi from the Torah. Torah meaning everything you're learning, what the halacha actually is, the emes. You have so many different opinions, so many different interpretations, and you have to know what to discard, what's psolas, in order to have that which is pure. So the whole tachlis of limud HaTorah is called halacha berura. Now again, I think we raised the question last week. If you were to ask, like, what is the goal of your shir, right? So you're learning Gittin, right? Is the goal of your shir when you're learning Shalech or Hazarik? Shalech. Okay, so is your shir like to be machriya in the machloksim of Rishonim? I mean, b'derech klal, no. B'derech klal, you're not going to be told halacha l'maisa. And in fact, in my experience, if a Talmud would have the nerve to ask, so what's the halacha here? The Rebbe would say, we're not doing that. Right? So what's pshat? It says the whole thing is halacha berura. So there are really two terutzim to this. Both of them are emes at the same time, and that is ein chinami. The derech of the yeshivas is not necessarily the derech the Gra was advocating. The Gra says the tachlis of learning is to know halacha berura. What he says is what he says, and that's the tachlis of learning. Now, however, you have to understand that that doesn't mean by just learning the Mishnah Berurah or whatever the Even Ezra equivalent would be. Halacha berura means to go through the sugya be'iyon with Rishonim, to understand the svaras, and then to understand which svaras are like the bran or the psolas that you have to remove, and which svaras are final. The Chazon Ish did that. I mean, if you open up the Sefer Chazon Ish, right, so the Chazon Ish goes through every sugya in all of Shas, including Kodshim and Tyrus, every single sugya. And every single sugya, the Chazon Ish is machriya, what the halacha is. Says the halacha is this, based on all of these things. Sometimes he has things like charts. He'll go over like 50 combinations of something. You know, these are the halachas that are yaitse from the sugya. So ein achinami. The fact that we don't do it, that doesn't mean what we do is right. Maybe what we do is wrong. The tachlis is halacha brura. But I also think that even though we're not doing it exactly the way the Gra said, but we're approaching it in some way, because since halacha brura depends on understanding the sugya and understanding the svaras, so when you learn to understand the different svaras, you are at least approaching the goal of halacha brura, even if you don't get like the final thing, you see? So halacha brura means you clearly understand the sugya, you understand the different svaras in the sugya, you understand which svaras are considered to be good svaras, which are not such good svaras, right? That way you're motzi the subin, and you're motzi the teven, and you're motzi the motes from the grain. So, the yeshiva world, at least a good share, is engaged in that process, although they don't necessarily finish the process. But that's the tachlis. So once again, the tachlis of your in is not to come up with chidushim. Right? People often think, I'm going to come up with a chiddush. No, that's not, you don't have to have any chidushim at all. The tachlis is to understand what the Gemara is saying, to understand the different shitos in the Rishonim, to understand the basic svaras of all of these different approaches, and then to determine which svaras are really don't survive the maskana, because often when you learn a sugya, there are many svaras that are hava minas, and it's sometimes hard to figure out which of those svaras remain at the end and which don't. So halacha brura is the process of determining which svaras remain, right? So in a sense, even though we're not mamash doing halacha brura, but the hope would be that you're approaching some getter of halacha brura. And he says, the Gra brings another pasuk here, v'zeh shekosuf, right? The curse of Adam Harishain after the Eitz Hadas was kaitz v'dardar tatzmiach lach. Remember that when you cultivate the ground and you want to get your grain, you will often have thorns, wild thorns that grow up. Kaitz v'dardar. So that's a little different than the mites and the teven, which is in the grain itself, but it's the same idea that in the course of your amelis, you will encounter a lot of false starts, like thorns, things that are not good. But that's memela, that's the amelis of Torah, that all of us accomplish much darkness, or we wander in darkness till we get to a certain level of light. And that's the amelis, because the amelis is we come to emes only by sheker, meaning the sheker, we have this thought and that thought and that thought, and then we understand what's right and what's not right, but without going through. In fact, people ask the question often, if you're learning a sugya, and the Gemara goes through all sorts of hava minas, which it slugs up. It slugs up. It shows that they're wrong. So a person might wonder, even if I have pshat in the Gemara, I'm not talking about I don't have pshat. I have pshat in the Gemara, and the Gemara says this, says, nope, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. So I'm wondering, was I Mekayim Talmud Torah for the past hour? I mean, I learned a bunch of things that the Gemara says was wrong. So the answer is, it's a davar pashut. You're Mekayim Talmud Torah with hava minas, and you're even Mekayim Talmud Torah not only with the hava minas of the Gemara, you're Mekayim Talmud Torah with your own mistakes in pshat. I make mistakes. I just translate the Gemara wrong. I make a mistake. I'm trying to figure it out, and I make a mistake. I'm just wrong. So you ask yourself, did I waste my time? Did I learn? Does that count for learning? Because it's not emes. Torah has to be emes. The answer is it vaday counts for learning, because this is the process of how you get to emes. That we have to grapple, we have to think. The derech of Torah Shabbat Peh is kaitz v'dardar tatzmiach lach. To get the bread, you got to go through the thorns. To get the bread, you got to remove the motes and the teben and the Morsan and the Subin. That's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu set it up, that it's through the Amelos B'Torah that we come to emes. If you were to simply be given the maskanas, like Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, you were simply told what the right answer is, and it wouldn't have been through the process of exploring those possibilities, you really wouldn't understand the emes. I mean, in a sense, you could repeat it maybe, but you wouldn't really understand it. You understand it when you get to it by considering all the other things. This is one of the answers people ask. People often ask, why learn Gemara? Why don't I just learn the maskana? The answer is the maskana is not meaningful to you until you've considered the possibilities. Now, I want to say with this, I think I have a kasha. Okay, it's not, I mean, on a Maisa. I have a kasha on a famous Maisa that they say about Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. You know, there is a Das Yochid in the Shulchan Aruch, Das Yochid, we don't pass it like it actually, that says that Suda Shalishis, on Shabbos you have to eat 3 meals. So some say that you could be Makayim Suda Shalishis by learning. Talmud Torah can be called a meal for Suda Shalishis. It's a Das Yochid, we shouldn't be knowing this way. So the story goes that Rav Chaim Brisker was learning, giving a shir, and then he said, we have to stop, we have to eat Suda Shalishis. So one of his Talmidim said to him, Rebbe, we're in the middle of learning, and some shittas say that you're Makayim Suda Shalishis with Divrei Torah. So why do we have to stop for Suda Shalishis? Continue the Divrei Torah. So Rav Chaim, the simple answer would have been, it's a Das Yachid. Okay, but Rav Chaim gave it the following answer. He said, listen, yeah, you're right. Let's assume we could be Makayim Suda Shalishis with Divrei Torah. So I tell you a Chiddush, and Motzei Shabbos I realize that there's a pircha, and there's a kasha, and it's upgeschlagt. So lemafreya, it wasn't Torah. If it wasn't Torah, there's no Suda Shalishis. He says, my Rebbitzins gefilte fish, he says, is irrefutable. You can't slug up the gefilte fish, so we'll have shalosh shidduchos for sure. If I tell you Divrei Torah, it's a suffix. So what's the assumption? Okay, it's a Maisa. You don't have to take it so seriously. But what's the assumption of the Maisa? The assumption of the Maisa is, I tell you a shtickle Torah, or you're learning some Torah, and it's shlugged up, there's no Torah. I think, based on this, that no. Even if it's shlugged up, it's Torah. You didn't waste your time. You're trying to be miyageya to understand the emes. Think about this. Even a gadol. A lot of the hours that the gadol is learning is exploring alternatives that turn out not to be emes. So what's the pshat? In 10 hours of learning, you might have 1 hour of emes, but you get credited for 10 hours because this was all the process, right? So I think Rav Chaim, the Maisa is not emes, that even if the Torah is upgeschlugt, it's still going to be valid Torah because it's the process. Yeah.
Is there an idea, and I thought I heard this possibly from Chaim Rosner, of literally just not like this, not learning for the sake of an outcome, but learning for its own sake of Yigia and Torah and learning Torah Kilu. Chaim Rosner discusses bringing Torah into bringing Torah down Kilu. I've heard it said that even just Yigia, in as far as in Torah, not coming to any maskan, not for the purpose of coming to any maskan, is for itself. No, that's a very good point. This is really the thesis of the Nefesh HaChaim in Shar Dalet. He points out like this. He points out that Chazal in Maseches Nedarim say the following: Asay devarim l'shem pa'alan. Devarim, do mitzvahs for the sake of the Creator, meaning do mitzvahs for the sake of God. V'daber bohem, and speak about them, which means learning, lishman or lishma, for their sake. So if Chaim Volozhiner says, what does Torah lishma mean? It doesn't mean, see, if it would have meant I learned Torah l'shem shamayim, it would say I learned Torah l'shem shamayim. It doesn't say that. Mitzvahs, he says, you do l'shem shamayim. You say, I'm doing this mitzvah to serve God. Torah, he says, lishma,
is l'shem Torah. L'shem Torah meaning I'm learning Torah in order to understand Torah. In other words, the problem is this. Obviously, we're learning Torah because it's Hashem's Torah. But Rav Chaim was telling you, don't think so much about it. Because if I keep on thinking, I'm learning because it's Avodas Hashem, there's a certain sakana. And the sakana is that a lot of the details of the sugya are not going to interest you anymore. I mean, let's assume you're a spiritual person. And I'm learning Torah because I want to be dovok in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now that sounds good, right? That sounds good. And in reality, that is ultimately what it is. But if you're too consciously attached to the spiritual idea, then when you look at a Taisvis, and you look at a Rebbe Kiva Eger, and you look at a Ketzais, and you're going over detail after detail after detail, and it's not directly connected to spiritual ideas, you're going to say, yeah, I don't want to do the Ketzais. I don't feel close to Hashem when I do that. I want to do Musar. I want to say Tehillim. So Rav Chaim, in fact, this was the problem with Chassidus. Again, Rav Chaim Volozhiner was very, very worried that if you think about, again, it sounds funny, if you think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly, too much in your learning, the learning is not going to engross you because you're going to say it's not spiritual. So Rav Chaim's point was that when you're learning, you should be focusing on, I want to understand this as deeply as possible. And you are correct, even if it doesn't bring me to a maskana. But I want to understand the process as thoroughly as possible. And then Rav Chaim says, every hour, you should stop for a few minutes and think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, that kind of energy, say, this is the Torah of God, and through this learning, I am davuk in Hashem. Make some time for Devekas. But Devekas should not be in your conscious mind. I mean, you hear this for here. Because, I mean, you see this all the time. People come to yeshiva, and, they're spiritual. I want to become close to God. I want to be close to God. And they figure the Talmud will teach me everything about being close to God. Yes, the secrets of life. So you sit down and we talk about a shaliach giving a get, or two people holding a talis, or a chicken lays an egg on Shabbos. And it's very confusing. It's very disorienting, really, because a person who comes for ruchnius is not automatically going to see the ruchnius in these ideas. Now, Ali b'diyemes, it's makashri yidu Hashem. It is. But on a conscious level, it's hard to explain. It's something you experience. As you commit to learning, you experience it. But you can't tell a guy ahead of time, you're going to feel these things right away. In fact, as they say, it's more like a law school. And as people think, going to yeshiva, it's closer to a law school than a theological seminary. Right? So you are correct. That's why Rav Chaim says we don't say learn Torah l'shem shemayim. We say learn Torah lishma l'shem Torah. But even Rav Chaim would say, even though you're correct, Rav Chaim did not emphasize the halacha like the Gra emphasized it, but that still means you understand the sugya, you understand the shitas, the svaras. It's not just covering ground, you're just, stam learning. You're learning with the idea that I want to have the best havana of a sugya that I can have. So I would suggest that that's nichlal in halacha berura. Halacha berura doesn't have to be bedavka, the final answer. In fact, I think I mentioned a number of times, Revel Yashiv used to be, when he was in the Rabbanut, that was part of his career for many, many years. But even after he left the Rabbanut, he would give the bechinas for dayanim. He would, people who were appointed to be dayanim on Batei Din would have to get a bechina. It's very hard to be a dayan. First of all, to qualify as a dayan is very, very hard. But the emes says, even if you qualify as a dayan, that doesn't mean you'll get a job as a dayan. That's another thing. Qualifying is hard, and there are people who are qualified as dayan. I think Rav Peretz is actually qualified to be a dayan, but he's not a dayan, meaning he doesn't have a job. He doesn't have a job on a Beis Din, because that's kind of political a little bit. You could be, but anyway, but Rabbi Yashiv was the one who would give people bechinas if they could be dayanim. So these people are mitzuyanim. Anyone that's finished the dayanis program is a chashuv, a talmid chacham. But there were two types that would come to Rabbi Yashiv. One type was the guy who memorized Choshen Mishpat. He knows every single halacha in Choshen Mishpat, and every shach and every sma. Like, you ask him, what does the shach say in Siman Reish Chafei, Siman Sifkatan Chafov? He says, I know, I'll tell you. Then there were guys who didn't necessarily know it in that level, but they knew the sugyas of the Gemara very well with all the Rishonim, and they knew any question you'd ask them, they could tell you, this is the Shaila, this is the Machlokas, these are the Svaras. But they didn't remember what the Shach said. So Rabbi Yashiv actually preferred the second kind of person to the first, because the first person knew everything in the Shulchan Aruch. But a lot of shaylas that come up are not in the Shulchan Aruch. You have to be medam and milsa lemilsa. So he felt someone who knew the Gemara and knew the Rishonim, when he needed to look at the final halacha, it would be very simple. He'd look up the final halacha. He didn't have to remember the final halacha. Although Rabbi Yashiv Lamaisa remembered that too. Like Rabbi Yashiv said on himself, the day that I don't remember every sif katan in the shach, I am not going to paskin a shayla anymore. He said, I am not going to paskin unless I remember every single thing. Okay, but so Rabbi Yashiv himself was on that madrega too, but he held, if you have to choose, better a person with a sholita in the Gemara and the Rishonim than the person who just memorizes every maskana. Because every maskana will cover you in the cases in the Shulchan Aruch, but it won't give you the ability to be medama and milsa lemilsa. This is why he didn't like a lot of halacha kolalim. Halacha kolalim are very popular. And I don't mean to be maitzilad, I mean, some of them are very, very excellent. But sometimes a halacha kolel, there's a strong yetzer hara to kind of get through the Gemara as quickly as possible so we can look at Igros Moshe or Mishnah Brura, and they don't want to spend the time to go over the Ran and the Taisus and Ramban and all of those things because they just want to get to the halacha. And Rabbi Yashiv held that was very, very wrong because to really be able to paskin halacha, you need to spend a lot of time in the Gemara and the Rishonim, and then you come to a matzav where you're able to understand the halacha. So he didn't like the quickie, which you might call the quickie. Or is what did my Rebbe once say, Rav Klasky? I just read this the other day. I actually didn't hear it from him, but he was telling somebody. He says, you can make instant coffee, but you can't make instant Torah. He says, Torah, Torah is not instant. Torah requires going through all of these things. Okay, so that's the halacha brura, and that's the kaitz v'dardar tatzmi halach. It's through the thorns and the false starts that you come to a hasaga of emes. Okay. Now, he then goes on and says, Halaimed lishma. If you learn lishma, now again, the Gra does not define lishma, but as I indicate, Shar Dalet of Nefesh HaChaim says lishma is, I'm learning to understand the Torah as best as I can. Daima, Lemisha Eichel Pas Nikia L'Seiva. You're eating pure bread. Again, today we say refined flour is bad, but again, in the language of Chazal, the refined flour is the best type of flour, and it will fill you up. You will feel satiated. You will feel satisfied, because when you learn Torah Lishma, you will get to the emes, because Lishma means I'm learning to understand. I'm not learning to impress somebody. I'm not learning for gaiva. This is interesting. Everybody, maybe a Talmud Chacham has a bigger nisayon. We have a certain investment in our ego, in our creativity, in our chidushim. So even if it may not be so eiskalt and it may not be so emistic, we want to hold on to it. We want to fight for it. But when a person learns Lishma, And again, we're going through Chaim Volozhiner's definition. I learn because I want to understand the emes. So they're willing to rethink things, even if, they have a nice chiddush, but, if it's not, doesn't fit in the words, or it's not totally Sfaradic, they're willing to be chayzer. I think I told you the Maisa about Shlomo Zalman Auerbach when he was, this probably goes back to 1930s or maybe 1940s, I think 1930s, even before Medina, where he was an Avrech in Kailel, a young man, and there was a parnasa. He had to get a job. He had to apply for a job too. So he applied to be a Magid Shir in Kol Torah, which is the yeshiva he eventually became the Rosh Yeshiva, but he was going to be a Magid Shir. So how do you become a Magid Shir? You got to give a shir in front of the Rabbeim. That's what you do. Although Or Sameach, I don't think, had such a rule necessarily, but in a lot of yeshivas, you give a shir in front of the other Rabbeim, and they decide if your shir is a good shir or not a good shir. So Rav Shlomo Zalman was maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, and he had to give a shir in front of the older Rosh Yeshiva of Kol Torah. And they asked him, one of them asked him a kasha in the middle. A kasha in the middle? And Rav Shlomo Zalman said, they thought a moment, and he said, your kasha slugs up my shir. Your kasha refused my shir. He says, I guess I'm wrong. And he just left. He says, I guess we'll stop here because this destroys everything. So he goes home. Shlomo, now Kol Torah, just even today, is in Bayit Vagan, and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach lived in Sharei Chesed. So it's a distance. I'm not sure if he took a bus or he walked. I'm not sure what he did. But he comes home to Sharei Chesed, very sad, and he tells the Rebbetzin, I messed up. I know we need a parnasa. I need a job. And I gave a share, and in the middle of the share, got slugged up. So I'm assuming that I just failed. So we'll have to pray to Hashem for some other opportunity. So right afterwards, somebody runs to his apartment. In those days, people didn't have phones. It was like only a phone in the post office. So the main post office, then as now, was on Rehov Yafa. So it's around a mile from Sharei Chesed. They said, hey, there's a phone call for you in the post office. That's what life was like. Life was that way. In fact, not only then, even as late as like the 1960s. You had to run to the post office to get a phone. Not everybody had a phone. It was 5 years sometimes for a phone, even in the 1960s. Unless you had a lot of money, you paid a lot of money for a phone. Aliyah then was a much harder thing than today. So he goes to the post office, and it's the Rosh Yeshiva from Kol Torah that they say, we'd like to offer you a shir. We'd like to give you a shir. So he says, Baruch Hashem, thank you so much, but I said a shir. You asked me a kasha. I couldn't answer the kasha. I failed. It was a dud. Why are you giving me the shir? So they said, that's the Rebbe we want. Because I'm sure a capable Talmud Chacham could always dray himself out of anything. Meaning, someone asks you a kasha, you're smart enough, you could give some type of teretz. But you didn't want to do that because you knew it wasn't emes. And you were willing to embarrass yourself. You were willing not to look good because you were only mavakesh emes. You weren't protecting your ego. You weren't there to make your chiddush look good. That's the Rebbe we want. We want the Rebbe who will be maida al ha'emes, even if it's against his ego, against his kavod. Because again, we knew you would be able to. Talmud Chacham can, if he really wanted to, could come up with something. You could have come up with something, but you knew it wasn't true. That's the role model we want for our Talmidim. An amazing thing, because that's learning Lishma. So again, according to Rav Chaim Volozhiner, learning Lishma is not necessarily directly referring to L'Shem Hashem, but it's L'Shem, the emes of Torah itself, you see? That's why, Rebbe Kiva Eger, everyone knows Rebbe Kiva Eger has this thing in the Gemara called Gilyon Hashas, right? A little star in the Gemara, and it's the side, and Gilyon Hashas is very short. It's not the Chidushim, the long Chidushim of Gilyon Hashas are short things. A lot of times it's Mar Makaimis. In fact, they say the origin of Gilyon HaShas is Rebbe Akiva Eiger had a Bekiyas Seder, where he would learn, it's hard to believe, 1,000 blot of Gemara a day. I mean, that basically means he finished Shas every 3 days. I mean, it's hard to imagine. Although the Chazon Ish said, when people told the Chazon Ish, they say Rebbe Akiva Eiger learned 1,000 blot of Gemara a day. The Chazon Ish says, I'll tell you something greater. He could learn 1 blot over 1,000 days. In other words, his Ian was so great that he could spend 1,000 days on a blot, but 1,000 blot in a day. He did both. So the Gilyon HaShas are the little notes he would make in his Bekiyas Seder. He'd make these little notes. So there's a whole hierarchy. There's a whole code of how you read it, because Rebbe Akiva Eiger just throws out these kashas, like little notation kashas. And he uses different lashonos. Sometimes he says Sorech Ian. And sometimes he says Sorech Ian Godol. And sometimes he says Sorech Ian Godol Ma'od. And sometimes he says Hashem Yoyer Einai. Different things. And the Rosh Hashivas are oimed on how difficult the kasha, right? In other words, if Rebbe Akiva Eiger calls something in Sorech Ian Ma'od, you're almost not allowed to give a teretz. You try to give a teretz, then, what are you doing? You can't, it's not shaykh to give a teretz, Sarachi and Ma'id. But Rebbe Akiva Eiger often notes different things that interested him. For example, Rashi in Brachos says on a certain lashon in the Gemara that he doesn't know what it means. Eini yodea mahu. And Rebbe Akiva Eiger is mitzayin all the places in Shas where Rashi says, I don't know. He comes up with 50 places. And Rebbe Akiva Eiger wanted to point that out. Like he wanted to list that Rashi says a lot of times, I don't know. What's the point of that list? Again, Anava. Rebbe Akiva Eiger wanted to remember himself and to teach people who would be reading his Sefer. The notion that the greatest of the Rishonim, Rashi, the greatest of the greatest, was so humble that he would say, I don't know what this means. I don't know what it means. Rebbe Akiva Eiger's list, by the way, is not complete. Other people have been mashlim, other places where Rashi has said Eini Yodea, but Rebbe Akiva Eiger gives a lot of places. So that also shows you, number one, it teaches you about Rashi, and it teaches you about Rebbe Akiva Eiger, what Rebbe Akiva Eiger thought was important. It was important to make the point that Rashi said, Eini Yodea. So that's why he says that learning Torah Lishma means you'll come to emes, because Lishma means I'm learning for emes. I'm learning for emes, and therefore Hashem will give you what you're learning for. I'm learning for emes. I will be zeicha to emes. Okay, and that's what he says. Al yedei lishma zeicha lahasig amita satira. Learning lishma will be a merit to attain the truth of Torah. Because again, it's very logical, because the meaning of lishma is I am looking for the emes. I'm looking for the emes. Now, then he says another thing which is not automatic, but gam tiskayim biyadai. It will remain with him, meaning he'll remember it. In other words, this is already two different things, meaning learning Lishma, you will come to the emes of Torah. Okay, that makes sense because that's what Lishma means. And then there's a second point that Tiskayim biyadai seems to be you'll remember it more. Again, is this just a segula? In other words, is that just a gift? No, since you're learning Lishma, the Eibishter will give you good memory. Meaning, is it just a sechar? Maybe. Or is there a logical connection between Lishma and remembering? Meaning, is there a logical reason why when I learn Lishma, I will remember my learning more? It could be there very much is, because when you're learning for emes, see, if you're learning just to show how smart you are, so a svara comes to you, it's very smart, but you'll forget it because it was just there to impress or whatever it is. When you're learning because you want to understand the emes, that's going to determine how you live your life. So you're going to remember that because it's nogeya to my life. The Torah is my life, and this is the emes of Torah. And he brings, this is the meaning, Luyukme Gersa Siyata Dishmaya. Luyukme, to remain with your learning, you need a special divine siyua, and that divine siyua comes from learning Torah Lishma. Now, he then says, Halomed Shalo Lishma. A person who learns Torah Shalo Lishma. Now again, we're going to talk about this biarichas, but remember the Gemara. The Gemara says in Pesachim that a person should learn Torah even not Lishma, meaning Torah not Lishma is good also. It's good. Do it. Don't say, Chas v'shalom, if I don't learn Torah Lishma, what's the purpose? What do Chazal say? Learn Torah even Shalo Lishma, Shemitoch Shalo Lishma, Ba Lishma. So Lamaisa, it's a good thing. Do it, do it, do it. But it's inferior. It's like eating inferior bread with impurities. Now listen, eating inferior bread might be better than starving yourself. If you starve yourself, you die. Even junk food will keep you alive. So Memela, learn Torah Shalo Lishma because maybe it's like junk food in some ruchnistic sense, but better than starving. Okay, but it's not going to bring you to emes, because since I'm not learning with the kavanah for emes, I won't necessarily come to emes. Halomed Shalo Lishma, daima, lemish eichel ateven v'hamaitz. You're eating literally whole grain. You're eating the straw, and you're eating the chaff, and you're eating all sorts of things. Okay, so the good part gets into your body, but you can also get sick from all the other stuff there as well, and you're not going to be satisfied. And B'zeh shekosov, and this b'derech drush is the meaning of the pasuk. We say this every Shabbos in Pesukei de Zimra. Yiras Hashem, the fear of Hashem, the reverence I have for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Tahira, is pure. Omedes la'ad, and it stands forever. So note that the midah of Yiras Hashem in this pasuk is given two milas. It is pure, and it's a medes, it's eternal. Pure and eternal. So the Gra offers a beautiful pshat here. He says, Yiras Hashem is, even though, as Rav Chaim Volozhiner says, you're not consciously thinking about God when you're learning, but Yiras Hashem is the ultimate motivator why you learn Lishma. I learn Lishma because I believe this is Hashem's Ratzon, and I want to know Hashem's Ratzon. So Yiras Hashem equals Lishma. But you understand, in an indirect way. Not that you consciously think about it, but it's your motivation. So, Yiras Hashem, which leads you to Lishma, has two benefits. Benefit number one is, it is pure, meaning you will come to emes. All of the junk and the impurities will be filtered out. As we said before, when you learn Lishma, you're zeicha to the emes of Torah. That's what Tahira means. It's pure flour without psilus. The second benefit is it sticks with you in your memory. Omedes la'ad. It stays forever. Very, very, very nice. Yiras Hashem Tahira is the Amita Satira Bishas Limut, and Omedes La'ad is the Zikarain of Torah after Limut. Right? That's the pshat. And this is assuming that Yiras Hashem is a reference to Torah Lishma, because that is the motivator why I learn Torah Lishma. It's interesting. Told me a Maisa that Yaakov Kamenetsky once asked a grandson. It's hard to believe that. Well, I'll tell you what the story that somebody told me, that he was like in his 80s, and he asked the grandson, "Can I ask you something?" And the grandson said, oh, yeah, sure, Zaidi, what do you want to ask? So he said, I hear people talking about shichacha. They forget Torah. He says, I don't understand what that means. I think Yaakov deliberately just wanted to make the person. He says, what does it mean that people forget? I don't understand. How could people forget Torah? Like he was asking like a 20-year-old kid, like, I don't understand what it means to forget. Could you explain to me what it means to forget? This is what Kama V'Kama Gedalim said. They said that they don't know what shichacha. I mean, I'm sure they know what shichacha is, but in terms of experiencing, they did not experience shichacha satayra. Rav Yisrael Zalman used to tell the story. It's a strange story, and Rav Yisrael Zalman himself said it was a strange story, but perhaps it was an Eisas L'Shem. He says, when he was in Volozhin, Rav Yisrael Zalman was a Talmud in Volozhin. There was a big Eloi, didn't say the name of the person, who had chidushim and hafladik bekiyas, yediyas hatayra, wonderful thing. And in the middle, they were having lunch, and in the middle of the meal, the guy was saying a big, complicated chiddush, and somebody said to him, what you're saying is contradicted by Taisus and Bava Kama, whatever it is. And the man thought for a minute, and he realized to his horror that he had forgotten that Taisus. He was so distraught, he left the table without benching. He ran away, and he locked himself somewhere for 20 years, like to learn Shas 100 times or whatever it would be. And 20 or 30 years later, he became like a big gadol. So Rav Yisrael Zalman said, on one hand, the guy didn't bench. What's going on? I mean, you can't say he acted kahalacha. He's mechayiv to bench. But you see that his cheshek for Torah was so great. And the concept of forgetting was so devastating to him. I forgot a Taisus. What shayach? He immediately, maybe he was a getter of pikuach nefesh. Maybe that's the halachic heter, so to speak. It's pikuach nefesh he had to, start learning immediately. And Rav Yisrael Zalman himself said he didn't have a complete hesber of the Maaseh, but he wanted to show that this was the madrega. There was a madrega at the time. You forgot a Taisus? That is unimaginable. You forget a Taisus, right? Ad kedei kach, the guy left without benching. He had to, out of busha and about, he had to be masakin himself, right? So that was the chavivus of Torah in those days in Volozhin. Rav Yisrael Zalman would recount that particular story. Okay. Yeah. Although this reminds me, again, nothing to do with the point, but just reminds me of another story that is actually a beautiful story in terms of midas. There was a very great Talmid Chacham who was the Rav of Montreal for many years, Rav Pinchas Hirschberg. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Pinchas Hirschberg was really an Eloi. I mean, he knew Bavli, Yerushalmi, he had a photographic memory, and he was a tremendous masmid and a very, very kind person as well. He was only in after a few years ago. In fact, one of his grandchildren is actually learns, I think in Orlagola or something, but he's here. So Pinchas Hirschberg was an Eloi from a young age, and Elohim, especially when they're young, they're kind of abrasive or ostentatious a little bit. So Rav Chaim Eiser was already the Gadol Hador. Rav Chaim Eiser was talking. And Rav Chaim Eiser quoted a Taisus on Amid Beis. And Rav Hirschberg, who may have been 14 or something, said, it's Amid Aleph. And Rav Hirschberg was going to run to get a Gemara to show that Rav Chaim Eiser, And Rav Chaim Eiser said, no, you're right. I'm an older person. I don't remember as well as you. So, okay, what you say is probably right. Anyway, Rav Hirschberg went afterwards to check, and he saw that Rav Chaim Eiser was right. But Rav Chaim Eiser didn't want to embarrass the 14-year-old. So he said, "You're probably right. My memory's not as good as it was." That's true. Again, just to show you the midos tovos of Rav Chaim Ozer, that he was willing to say that he made a mistake in order that the 14-year-old should not be embarrassed. That's something to remember as well. Okay, so let's do a little bit of Yud Beis. Masha Amru. Now this is already going to be a bit of a problem. This is a Gemara in Psachim that I already mentioned, and you know this Gemara. Li'aylam Yasaik Adam B'Tayru Mitzvah Shelo Lishma. It is proper that a person should do mitzvahs and learn Torah, even Shelo Lishma. Even though it's inferior, even though it doesn't give you all the benefits, but it's something. It's l'chol hapachas potato chips. It's junk food. Now look at what the Gemara says. What does it mean Shelo Lishma? So the Gemara says, Hainu, she'eino mechavein l'shum davar rak minhag aveisav biyadav. Shelo Lishma means I learn because, that's the habit. That's the family I come from. That's what everybody else does. So I learn. I'm expected to learn because that's what I do. So that's called Shelo Lishma. In other words, I'm not passionate for the emes, but I learn. But look at this. Aval. Lo b'mi she'ikar limudo l'shem kavod. Now, this is a tremendous chiddush, and once again, I'm not sure what you do with this. Most of us, if I would ask you, what does it mean to learn Torah Shelo Lishma? So most of us would answer, I learn Torah for an ulterior motive. I learn Torah to impress people. I learn Torah for kavod. I learn Torah to show people how smart I am. That's what we would think. And that's what Chazal mean when they say, do it even Shelo Lishma. Shemitoch Shelo Lishma Ba Lishma. The Gra here says the following. If you learn Torah for kavod, you learn Torah to impress people, you learn Torah to show off, that is not the Shelo Lishma that Chazal say, Li'aylam Yilmad Adam Torah Shelo Lishma. The Shelo Lishma that the Gemara talks about is the guy's neutral. But when you learn l'shem kavod, that's not the Shelo Lishma that we're talking about. So my question is, what does that mean? So let's assume that I have a big ego and I want to learn because I want to show I'm the smartest guy in the class. Is the Gra saying I'm not supposed to learn? In other words, if this is not nichlal, we have a statement, Li'olam Yasaik Adam B'Torah Shelo Lishma. That's the statement. Says the Gra, that statement doesn't apply when you learn l'shem kavod. That's what he says. So my question is, so what does that mean? Therefore, I shouldn't learn? That doesn't quite sound right. So it could be, what the Gra means is like this. The Gra is not saying, and again, we're going to think about this. I have to research this and think about this some more. But it could be the Gra is not saying you shouldn't learn. But the Gra is saying the promise of mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, you're not going to get that benefit. In other words, einachinami, learn because you got to learn. But that which Chazal say, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, does not apply when a person learns l'shem kavod. You hear what I'm saying? The point I'm making is, the Gra doesn't mean, therefore, don't learn. But the Gra means you don't get the segula benefit of mitoch shelo lishma. Because otherwise, you get into a real mud nazach, where, you're telling a guy not to learn, which I don't think the Gra would tell a person. Now, don't learn until you can learn without kavod. No, that's a little hard. Yeah, did you say? Okay. All righty. Now, one more thing. He gives another example of Shelo Lishma. Ima yetzer, now this may apply even for kavod, interestingly enough. Ima yetzer mesis oso shlo limud klal. See, this proves my point. If you have a yetzer hara, I don't want to learn at all. And unless I get covered for my learning, this is exactly what I just said. If I don't want to learn at all, but it's the kavod that motivates me to learn, right? That's called a permissible shalol lishma. So when the Gra said that if you learn l'shem kavod, you don't get the benefit, that's not referring to a guy who wouldn't learn at all, because you're permitted to use kavod as something that motivates you. If otherwise you wouldn't learn at all. You need that. You need that. In fact, the Gra says, they don't quote it here, but this is based on the Gra's famous teaching. The Gemara in Sukkah says that if you have a Yetzer Hara, so what is it? Impaga b'cha menuvel zeh. If this disgusting Yetzer Hara grabs you, moshcheu lebeis hamedrash. Schlep him into the Beis HaMedrash. Meaning, don't let him keep you out of the Beis Medrash. So, the Gra says in Mishlei, it doesn't say, if the Yetzer Hara grabs me, I should escape from the Yetzer Hara. Right? He's grabbing me. It doesn't say, escape. It says, drag him in. You see the Chab. You have a Yetzer Hara, you're right defachar kavod, you need to be honored, you need everyone to think you're the smartest guy. So I could tell you as a Baal Musar, get rid of that, get rid of it, destroy it, be humble. But sometimes a person's not going to learn unless he has that kavod. So what do you got to do? You got to take the Yetzer Hara into the Beis Medrash. You see, not avoid the Yetzer Hara. Take the Yetzer Hara into the Beis HaMedrash. So there, the Gra seems to be saying that even l'shem kavod does have a legitimate role to at least be a motivator. And again, it's shalol lishma. It's not the highest level, but to a certain degree. Now, l'maisa though, I don't think he brings it here directly. But l'maisa, there's a Tosfos that asks a kasha. On one hand, we say, mitoch shalol lishma ba lishma. So it's a good thing to do. There's another Gemara that says, halome Torah shalol lishma. If you learn Torah shalol lishma, mutav sheyahafech shliyasei al panav. It would have been better if when you were born, the placenta would strangle you, meaning it would have been better had the person died at birth. It's worthless. It's worthless. Chazal say, mitoch shalol lishma ba lishma. So Tosfos is machalek between two types of shalol lishma, different than the Gra about neutral. He says there's a shalol lishma l'shem kavod or l'shem maman, and that's mitoch shalol lishma ba lishma, at least when otherwise you wouldn't be motivated. But then there's another level of shalol lishma which is called lekanter. Now lekanter is different. Lekanter is, I'm learning because I want to humiliate you. In other words, there's a difference between learning because I want people to think, I'm the best. So that's l'shem kavod. But learning so you should look bad, that's lekanter. And there, that bichlal has no value at all. It's a destructive thing. It's no value at all. And that's mutaf that the guy would have died and not learned Torah at all. So that is a chiluk Tosfos makes. The Gra doesn't make it here. Between lekanter and l'shem kavod. Right? So l'shem kavod, if that's going to motivate you, so let it motivate you. Lekanter is not. It's better not to learn. It's better not to learn than to learn lekanter. Lekanter does exist. I wouldn't say it exists all the time, but I don't want to get into my personal. I get the impression sometimes that people listen to shiurim of other people, such as Q&As, only for the purpose of showing how wrong the speaker is. You know, and I think I've felt that experience, and that is a lemaisa, an aspect of the concert. That's not a good thing. So one should be careful. Okay. Anyway, we'll stop here and have a good Shabbos. Okay.